Welcome back to the fourth video in the seventh lecture of this course in Covidenomics. We've been looking at how the pandemic may lead to fundamental technological change, what the conditions have to be around the technology. What I want to consider in this last video is the reactions to that change. And there can be two forms of reactions, but really they both come down to how will the bricks and mortar competitors fight back. So first I want to consider how they might fight back in the marketplace, and second I want to consider how they might fight back using government to help them. Let's start off with the fight back in the marketplace, and I'm going to look at shopping malls as an example. Now here the US is a few years ahead of Australia, and we can look at them for what might happen. And that helps us make sense of what we see happening in Australia. First thing to note is that in the US, online shopping pre-pandemic, much more common than it's been in Australia. And this has had a huge effect on shopping malls. A number of shopping malls have been just simply abandoned. There's actually groups on the internet that break into these shopping malls so that they take pictures of derelict shopping malls, basically just wasted investments. But shopping mall owners just aren't giving in to the internet, they're fighting back. They're trying to turn their shopping malls away from just simply being a bunch of stores, particularly depending on, say, big department stores, into entertainment venues, into places that people want to come, not just for the shops, but for a range of other things. So for example, you're getting much bigger food courts, much better restaurant areas in shopping malls. You're getting food courts where you can buy really fresh, good quality meat, fruit, vegetables, fish and so on. Another obvious one is that many shopping malls are starting to get cinema complexes or multiplexes as part of the mall. Or they're branching out into other entertainment venues. For example, bowling alleys, ice skating rinks, areas where younger children can play. Some shopping malls are getting entertainment venues such as sports bars. So they're not just becoming a place where you shop and then go home afterwards, but they are places that you can spend the weekend or you can go to after work. And a good example of that is where you're getting things like gyms in shopping centres. I do find it juxtaposition with the food court sign slightly interesting there. After you've finished your gym workout, you can go and fill up on some greasy food. The key point here is that shopping malls have themselves started to innovate to be able to fight off the competitive threat of online shopping. Rather than simply going head to head in shopping in an area where, quite frankly, they're likely to lose, what they're doing is branching out into things that you can't easily get off the internet. Those sort of experiences with other people. So the shopping mall bringing people together. Will this work? Will they survive? I don't know. A large number of shopping malls have closed down, particularly in the United States. We've seen far fewer closures here in Melbourne. And the internet isn't their only problem. For example, if you look at the increase in sales, one of the big factors eating into sales at traditional shopping malls are the big warehouses available on the outskirts of town, whether they happen to be Walmarts in the States or Bunnings warehouses and Office Works here in Australia. They're also having a big impact on shopping malls, and that's just really a different form of physical shopping. So, who's going to win this battle? I don't know. But the end result is that the customer wins. As an alternative, let's consider traditional media. In particular, let's consider newspapers. The old newspaper model was to provide content at either free or highly subsidised rates, to get the eyeballs onto the page and to sell advertising on that same page. But the internet has blown most of that model away. For example, the classifieds selling goods, selling cars, selling houses used to be called the rivers of gold for the print media because the Saturday papers in Australia were filled with those classified advertisements. But all of those advertisements have now gone online. You don't look in a newspaper to buy a car or a house. You look online at, say, carsales.com or realestate.com in Australia. And newspapers like the local ones we've got here in Australia suddenly find that they're in a worldwide fight, because you can get your news content now from the Financial Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, just to name a few, available online. And their advertising, which is done usually through, for example, Google's AdWords, can still be local. So the local newspapers have lost their big competitive advantages to the internet. They've lost it to other newspapers that have gone on the internet, but they've also lost it to things like Google search engine. The newspapers have tried fighting back in the marketplace, but quite frankly, they have dismally failed. They have tried subscription models, but very few people are willing to pay for subscription. And one of their beefs is that under standard copyright law, both in Australia and around the world, small snippets of news stories can be used online, for example, in Facebook or in Google News or even in Google Search. And people can use those to get an idea of a story, and if they're interested, then they can click through. Now, if they click through to the newspaper's site, the newspaper gets advertising revenue. But that revenue is a lot less than what they were getting through their print copy before the internet basically ate their business. So when you can't fight back through the marketplace, who are you going to call on? Well, the government's a good place. So the newspapers have gone, in this case, to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission and said, this is unfair. We should be paid for these small snippets that Google and Facebook in particular are using. They should be required to give us some money for that use, even though they're not breaking any law, and even though the law clearly says they have every right to use those small snippets, and even though when a user decides the story looks interesting and clicks on the link, they go to the newspaper site and the newspaper gets the advertising revenue. The ACCC has decided that the newspapers have a case. And the ACCC has decided that on the basis that the newspapers are providing a public good, that they do a range of things such as local reporting and court reporting that provide public benefits, high quality journalism, and that has to be protected. Personally, I'm rather cynical about this public good argument. It clearly doesn't hold for world news. I get much better world news from, for example, the Financial Times that I subscribe to. It really doesn't hold for local news or even national news. There's numerous sites I can get that information from, rather than just the newspaper sites. If I really want to find out, for example, what the government has said, well, it's very easy. The government puts out lots of press releases and it's easy enough to find them. Even getting down to the smaller niche areas, local news. Well, we're on the Facebook website or we're on the Facebook group for our local street. I get local news at a level that would be simply impossible for the traditional news media. If I really want to know about my local council meetings and how the local council's going, there are Facebook groups looking at that. So it's not clear that I need the newspapers or they're doing anything particularly different or valuable. Even in niche areas like court reporting, well, my background is competition economics and I used to work with the ACCC. If I want to know what's happening in antitrust or competition law in Australia, there are numerous sites that will tell me. There are numerous law firms that will keep me up to date every couple of days on what the latest cases and the results are. And the internet allows me to find those cases in real time. I don't any longer need a subscription service to actually access the cases and read them, the actual judgments themselves. So I see where the ACCC is coming from, but I really have trouble finding these so-called public goods that the newspapers are providing. Regardless of whether you're convinced by the argument in the ACCC's report or not, the decision has been made that Google and Facebook will be subject to a mandatory code of conduct that will require them to share their revenue from the use of these snippets of traditional news media to share the revenue with those traditional news media. Now, what's going to happen as a result of that? Well, we're not the first in the world to try this in Australia. It was tried in Spain. Google's reaction there was to say, well, we don't make any money out of Google News, so we're simply going to remove Spanish news content. Now, the ACCC believes that it has got around that ability by not only looking at Google News, but also looking at the general search engine. There's an arbitration process in the ACCC's mandatory code of conduct. That's also been tried in Europe. Where it was tried in Europe, the media firms very quickly reached an agreement with Google whereby Google got the material for free, because the worst thing for the news media were not getting the clicks through from Google News and from the Google search engine. So this is in play as I'm making this video. We're going to have to see what comes out of it, but it's looking like a pretty brutal fight at the moment. Google's fighting back and threatening various retaliatory behaviour. Facebook, well, it's not quite clear how Facebook stops users from sharing snippets from news media, and how on earth revenue or that's even going to be governed, because Facebook, in a sense, it's out of Facebook's control, the user posts. So let's see what happens. The key takeaway here, though, is that don't expect traditional businesses that are being put out of business by technology, don't expect them to go down without a fight. They may start off by fighting in the marketplace, but if that doesn't work, they're going to start calling on government. And when that happens, unlike fighting back in the marketplace, which benefits consumers, fighting back through government, well, that usually hurts consumers. So, thanks for listening. That's it for this one. See you back again for Lecture 8.